We've been here before. That's the end of the sermon. It's the heart of Mark's message to his audience of Christians in Rome. We've been here before. I hope by now you have heard me explain the backdrop of Mark's gospel enough times that you could interrupt me and tell it yourself. But for those who may not have been here, a quick recap. What I've mentioned in previous sermons, the author, whom I'll refer to as Mark, is writing sometime between the years 65 and 75 AD. And if you remember your first century history, then you know that Rome burned in the year 64. And Emperor Nero, ever the unstable genius, blamed it on the Christians in Rome. His forces raided the city and swept up innocent Christians that he had just scapegoated. And they were imprisoned and tortured and killed in gruesome ways. A few years later, after Nero's suicide plunged the Roman Empire into civil war, the Jews revolted against Rome, and their uprising was brutally suppressed. And in the process, the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed again. Which means the same traumatic experience that shaped so much of the Hebrew Scriptures, some of which we've studied already, that the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem at the hands of the Babylonians, it was happening again in 70 AD. Whether it was the purge of Christians that began at the whim of Nero's malicious opportunism, or their continued persecution in the aftermath of the suppression of the Jewish revolt, the political and social events of his world and time were likely catalysts for Mark to compile the oral tradition about Jesus into this written gospel so that it could be shared and passed on before it could be lost. This is especially the case when we consider the Christian tradition that Nero's purge of Christians was also when Peter and Paul were both executed. Paul beheaded, and Peter traditionally believed to have been crucified upside down. Now, we don't know that this happened for certain, but scholars tend to agree this was when they were likely killed because they both go silent after this. They were the leaders of this fledgling faith. They established churches and collections and rules for faith and practice for the earliest churches that had ever existed. Whether or not they thought of themselves as figureheads, they were, and Nero executed them alongside scores of others. None of them are named by the Romans in their historical records. Peter and Paul, pillars of the faith, just a pair of the faithful who were killed. Mark is retelling the stories of Jesus and his disciples to terrified, confused, and rudderless Christians living in Rome, sometime after Nero's persecution, in that shaky uncertainty of not knowing whether the persecution would return under the next emperor. To them, Mark is writing this gospel, in essence reminding them, we've been here before. Just remember what happened to Jesus, he's saying, the true founder of the faith, the one we're identified by and targeted for. Remember what happened to him. The empire killed him. It tortured him, humiliated and mocked him. I have to wonder if Mark goes into the detail he does that Greg read for us precisely because the Christians in his day had lost loved ones to similar acts of humiliation and mockery and torture and execution. We don't usually talk about this here on Palm Sunday. Jesus' death, though, was horrifying and terrifying. But by capturing it for posterity, Mark is indicting and undermining the empire at the same time. This is what it does, he's saying. It kills and intimidates so it can retain its power. Nothing new under the sun, as it were. Those anxious Christians were probably experiencing an existential crisis of faith. I would be. Wondering if it was worth it at all, knowing what had happened to their loved ones and leaders. To them, Mark is saying, we've been here before. He's saying it to us too. How many of us are restless and frightened, enraged and worried, uncertain, despairing, cynical, hopeless? How many in our congregation in Worcester, in Massachusetts, in the United States of America know the threat of being hunted by their government? The fear of going to their place of worship or work or grocery store or school. How many of us, our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors, are enduring the trauma of anti-Semitism, xenophobia, racism, sexism, transphobia, rising anti-vaccination and anti-science thinking? Throw in a war or two, a blown-up fishing boat or 12, a crisis of affordability, an increasing number of strong men around the world. We know something today. Something more than we did even 15 years ago about what life might have been like for those earliest Christians, for marginalized people today, for the impoverished and oppressed people throughout history. Oh, we've been here before, all right. But that's the power of Mark's gospel message, of the story and life of Jesus, of the witness of the followers then and now. It inspires and encourages and reminds us that we are not alone, not in the suffering, and not in the fight either. I've started thinking that Mark's gospel is a proto-anti-imperial manifesto. One centered not on military maneuvers or political prowess, but employing the power of theology to encourage, to give courage to those earliest Christians in Rome. Don't give up. Don't give in. Empire brutalizes so it can gain compliance, so it can maintain an illusion of control. The kingdom of God undermines it. Don't give up. Don't give in. Love and solidarity, endurance in suffering. It clarifies what you believe. It makes it more contagious. Don't give up. Don't give in. This kind of gospel message is why courageous Christians have written and preached and led their congregations and constituencies and friends to shift from their complacency and comfort to a posture of compassion and courage, to help people make the brave shift from despair to hope. People like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who penned his famous letter from a Birmingham jail, where he called out and called in white moderates in the South who thought black people were pushing too hard and too fast for change. Do you remember how he implored them to stop being neutral, to stop putting the onus on the victims of racism and segregation? Mark is right. We've been here before. People like Reverend Alan Bosek, one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, who joined with others like Archbishop Desmond Tutu in labeling support of apartheid as a heresy. Do you remember or do you know that they voted to suspend white Dutch Reformed churches in South Africa from the fellowship of the World Alliance of Reformed Churches precisely because of their complicity with apartheid? We've been here before. Women and men who were Baptists in New York, in Massachusetts, Quakers, Methodists, so many other people from so many other traditions and faiths who believed that slavery was immoral, and that for Christians especially, it was antithetical to the gospel of Christ. They risked themselves in order to change the laws, and when that didn't happen, they were willing to break them if it meant helping people trapped in slavery. We've been here before. The Confessing Church in Nazi Germany, with theologians like Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer leading the way. They called out the churches and people that supported the Nazi regime early on. They called out those that benefited from complying with the state and those whose faith was being warped into nationalism. In Minneapolis 2 months ago, when local clergy put out a call for clergy around the country to come and stand with them as they stood with their neighbors who were being hunted and arrested by their government, clergy responded in person and in prayer. Our own Reverend Catherine was there, joining in solidarity. Just yesterday, some 30 to 35 members of this church, you all, were out protesting, aligning your faith and actions in a stance against tyranny and brutality and Christian nationalism, alongside scores of others here and around the nation. Friends, we've been here before. And not just the scary and enraging parts, but those powerful, hope-filled, inspirational parts where the courage of a collective of people dares to resist evil, models how love trumps hate, and persists together in triumphs over injustice. Friends, don't forget the triumph. The Roman Empire collapsed. Nazi Germany was defeated. Slavery was abolished. Apartheid ended. Civil rights were won. Jesus was raised from the dead. We've been here before. We've seen victories before, and we can again together. And yes, I know that several of those were achieved by the violence of war. But maybe that's part of the point too, because I think those who are conservative here this morning will pick up on my earlier comment that Mark's gospel isn't about political prowess. And those here this morning who are liberals will hear what I said about it not being concerned with military maneuvers or military might. I need both to be correct. I did say that, but I think homing in on those comments misses the bigger picture, because I wonder with you this morning, how many of those evils were actually supported by the church itself, by Christians? Slavery, Nazi Germany, the Roman Empire at certain points, apartheid, segregation. The short list of courageous Christian leaders I just mentioned, they all pleaded with complacent, comfortable, complicit Christians in every way they could imagine in their time to plead with them to stop supporting injustice. How many lives would have been saved? How many lives would have flourished had the comfortable Christians in the great struggles of their day had the same courage to embody the kind of faith and life that Jesus modeled, that his followers in early Rome followed, that so many others have followed? A way of living that's willing to love people, even enemies, to the point of sacrificing your own life, your own livelihood, your own prosperity, your own reputation. How many lives would have been saved if comfortable Christians had joined the fight? Church, how dare we, if we ever waste the efforts and examples of those who come before us, who risked everything, even their lives, who've shown us the way of Jesus so clearly. How dare we waste that? Sometimes being a good Christian meant being a bad Roman. And sometimes being a good Christian right now increasingly means being labeled a bad American. But who has your loyalty? A president? A flag? A party? Or this Jesus character whom Mark says is the Son of God, whom the centurion and agent of the empire himself even recognizes was the Son of God, not because he saved himself from the cross and suffering, but precisely because he didn't, because he endured it. That's Mark's focus, not so much on a resurrection and not even that much on an atonement. For Mark, the message really seems to be that this man was the Son of God, the anointed one of God, and his power was not found in weapons or wealth, but in what appeared to be weakness to those who killed him. And for Mark, for the Christians in Rome, for us today, that is the profundity of the cross. Not that it saves from hell or that God needed to kill a child to save some wretched sinners. The profundity of the cross is in its contradiction of the empire, because it revealed the depravity and meaninglessness of what Rome stood for. Peace through violence is no peace at all. It's certainly not the just kind of peace of the kingdom of God. Friends, being a Christian hasn't cost most of us anything. Not for our entire lives. Not for generations, even. It might have cost a few laughs or a few fewer invitations to dinner parties. Following Jesus faithfully doesn't mean you'll automatically suffer. It doesn't mean you need to lead a movement of justice either, but it does mean you should be on the side of justice. It means you need to do something. Faith isn't mere mental assent. It's embodied action. And sometimes that looks like marching and protesting, and other times like handing out bottles of water and smiles to those who are on their way to the front lines. Sometimes it will look like donating your resources or skills or time to creative ways of resisting the empire. Sometimes it'll be your prayers and your meditation that help ground you so you can better love your enemies. Sometimes it'll look like art or music or bearing witness to the injustices happening all around, to the pain, but also bearing witness to the power of hope and solidarity and camaraderie. As I close this morning, I was reminded this week of something the Italian political philosopher Antonio Gramsci said of Italy and the world back in 1930. He said, "The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." Friends, there's nothing new under the sun. And there are still monsters, and there are still people crying out, "Hosanna, God save us." But even so, I think he's right. The old world is dying, and the new one is always struggling to be born. A world that looks more like kindness and equality and justice, that looks more like Jesus than Caesar, that is suffering right now a momentary backlash of consequential proportions. Even so, the gospel calls out to each and every one of you. But thanks be to God, we know what to do. precisely because we've been here before.